What I'll do is if you have a question for Tom or Glenn, I'll repeat it because they probably won't be able to hear you. But just go ahead and ask if you'd like, and I can pass it along. Yeah.
So the Renaissance bypassed medieval period to get inspiration from Rome and Greece.
Yeah.
And then the Romantics bypassed the Renaissance period to get inspiration from the medieval period. What's next?
Okay, so the question we had here, Glenn, is a question regarding what's next. So, if the Renaissance skips over the medieval world to find its inspiration in the classical world, and then the Romantics skip over, the Enlightenment to get their inspiration from the medieval world, what's next? What can we expect to come next? So, put on your hat, Nostradamus, and tell us what is to come.
Well, unfortunately, as a historian, I'm much better at things that have already happened than things that are going to happen. I don't see at the moment a real parallel to either the Romantic or the Renaissance movements. I think part of that is because we have, we have imbibed deeply in the idea of progress. And there are all kinds of utopian schemes that have come up as a result of this ideal of progress. So I don't think we're going to find as much in our current cultural setting people looking to the past as much as buying into these various utopian schemes and trying to enact them. And the problem with that is that if you scratch a utopian, a totalitarian bleeds. Right. All utopians are totalitarian.
So let's just play a little sort of game of what if. Let's say over the next 50 years, all of the utopians get the reins of power and create a dystopia, and then we find ourselves on the other side of that in 50 to 70 years, just like we saw with the Soviet Union. Any thoughts on what might happen then?
The way you get out of a dystopia is going to inevitably be some form of totalitarian takeover, either from the left or the right. You're going to want some sort of strong man to come in and put things right. And so if we go the dystopian route, you can pretty well guarantee a totalitarian system will follow. Now, whether or not that system lasts, whether or not the hope would be, of course, that people would return to faith, but that's really in the hands of God. So, barring divine intervention, I think what we see, if the utopian scheme fails, is a strong man taking over.
Okay, we got another question.
Yep. I'm just curious if you can clarify there. When he says totalitarian, would he differentiate between authoritarian and totalitarian, or would he use those interchangeably?
Okay, so the question is, are the terms totalitarian and authoritarian synonymous, or can we make a distinction?
They're pretty close, but a totalitarian is sort of an authoritarian on steroids. The totalitarianism wants to control the totality of life. An authoritarian wants to control the things that's important to him, but if there are things that aren't important to him, he can just sort of leave them alone. A totalitarian doesn't believe that's possible, which is why all utopians are totalitarians, because if you have a dissenter, it threatens the coming utopia.
Yeah.
I got to do it. Listening to Glenn, loved just the history. He brought up postmillennialism. What does he view as the historical eschatological conviction? Why does he pick one, and does it inform his faith? So
we have a question about your eschatology, Glenn, and we'd like to know what it is, and how do you support it historically and so forth?
My eschatology is undecided. I think that there are strengths and weaknesses. Well, no, I think that there are strengths and weaknesses. Well, I'll go out on a limb in a second. I think that there are strengths and weaknesses in all three of the major views, but I also think it's a serious mistake to base your eschatology on one verse in the book of Revelation. Why do we pick the millennium as the touchstone for everything we do with eschatology? I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Now, granted, there are a lot of other scriptures that tie into this, how you interpret the promises of the kingdom in the Old Testament, prophets, and things like that. Yeah, I understand that's all part of the picture here. But my strong suspicion is that we're going to find when Jesus returns that we've been asking the wrong questions.
Okay. I think that's pretty much what we saw the first time he came.
Yep.
So, other questions? Yeah.
You know, at the beginning of the show, you were contrasting Romanticism with its predecessor, and it hit me that maybe, that was just a thought, since we're throwing out ideas, a false god requires kind of both, right? They need the freedom of subjective individualism to define their own reality. But then they go impose it on everybody else as if there's this universal absolutism. And so it's almost like the worst of both combined or in sequence. And then that made me think of like a snowboarder and a half pipe where you careen up one side, and you mentioned Romanticism will give way to totalitarianism, and then you careen on the other side, and you come back, and Christianity just holds all these things we've been wrestling with so beautifully together in balance, right? And you know, you think of music, right? Harmony, the word university, all these things that people are wrestling with, and it's just so beautifully, like the beautiful parts of Romanticism are there, right? Like you think of a father focusing his love on one child, coming toward him and embracing him, and it's like so individual, except it's in community, like you mentioned. I mean, it's just all these things are swirling in my mind. It's just, it makes me more and more thankful for the way God wove the creation, and which is an expression of his nature, obviously. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a great statement. Is there a question, though? I agree with everything you said. But did you have a question for either Glenn or
I guess
John?
not.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a thought.
That's right.
Never
Yeah.
said that all.
So what would lead someone so that English Romantic poets, two of the most famous, Wordsworth and Coleridge, probably Coleridge the most famous, I would guess. They start out very loose in many ways. They both in their lives with romantic inclinations, certainly, but very conservative. So was there something in their romanticism that caused that shift, or what was it? And this, I guess, especially for Glenn, because he's the historian. What is it that caused those guys to change from what they were to being a more conservative, a more realistic type of romantic?
Yeah, so Glenn, we had a question concerning Wordsworth and Coleridge and the fact that they started off kind of radical and ended pretty conservative. One of the things that comes to mind is Malcolm Guite's book, and what was it called? It was on Coleridge. Anyway, but do you have any thoughts on maybe that? You know, obviously, people have noted many times that young people are radical and then they grow more conservative as they get older. But is there anything more to it than that?
I suspect that that's really most of it. And the reason why you grow more conservative is you get more experience of the world. I also suspect, particularly depending on how young you're talking about, hormones may have something to do with it as well. But
Right.
now, just to be honest here, cards on the table, I'm much better at the continental and particularly the German romantics than I am at the English ones. So there may be a lot more going on there, but I'm just not aware of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of Malcolm. Are you familiar with Malcolm Guite? Yeah.
Well, with Coleridge,
No.
there definitely was a move from his kind of Unitarianism to an embrace of a more explicit Orthodox Christianity, read in a kind of Christian Platonism. So there was definitely that influence, I think, that probably deepened some of the convictions he had from the romantic element and found, I think, a more solid place. And yeah, I think he always contained a mystical element as well. That was which he didn't want to lose. And I thought he probably found retrieved in some of the romanticism that was being developed.
Mariner, that's it. That's the book. Yep. Yeah, that's a great book, by the way. If there was a book of literary criticism that could be turned into a movie, that's the book. Anyway, anything else? Any other questions?
I think Tom made a comment about the progressives of today being fearful of American nationalism.
Right.
But at the same time, there is a hidden nationalism in that group in itself. That struck me as a new thought. I did not consider that before. Is there, I think it was Tom maybe mentioned that?
Yeah,
Would you like to develop that more? Is there anything you point towards that defends that topic anymore?
Well, Tom, we had an observation concerning your comments regarding nationalism and kind of left-wing identity, politics, particularly with this expressive individualism. Do you have any maybe things that you maybe can point people to read that might help them understand what you were getting at?
Let's see if I have let me trace my thoughts there for a second. I think, what I was trying to show is the way in which a romantic element kind of hovers over a lot of political discourse, in the sense that they would interpret nationalism today through the lens of kind of anything that has to do with Hitler or fascism or those strands, which owed a lot to the irrational elements of Romanticism. But on the flip side, the alternative isn't the old kind of liberalism that looked for a kind of Enlightenment public rationality as the alternative. It has become a radical alternative of sort of tribal groupthink, and that allows for people to express anything they want to about themselves, define themselves anyway, and then and then create an instability against any kind of stable order like nationalism. I'll have to think about it, and maybe I could post it with the page, some resources. I know I've read. I was trying to think of there was one book that talked about the way in which. Oh, give me just a second. I think I can pull a title, but there are a few sources I can get to. Let me just say that, and I'll try to post them on our page that can at least show you the linkage between certain strands of Romanticism and the way in which politics are interpreted and even practiced today.
Anyway, we should probably wrap up. I have to drive for 2 hours, and then I fly out at 4 a.m. But thank you very much for coming out tonight, and we really do appreciate your time and your interest in what we're doing. And we'll be back next month. We're already talking about doing another live show here in Huntsville. All right. Bye-bye.